One of the biggest changes in all of human history wasn't some grand invention or a powerful new weapon. Nope, it was an accident. A simple little discovery that started with something like a dropped piece of fruit. And that tiny, seemingly insignificant moment, it didn't just change what was for dinner. It completely rerouted the entire course of human history. So let's trace that story all the way back to the beginning. Okay, so picture this for a second. You're a gatherer. Your whole life is spent searching for things to eat, like the sweetest fruits. You eat them and you just toss the seeds on the ground without a second thought. But then one day, you wander back to that same spot, and you see new plants growing, and it clicks. They grew from the seeds you dropped. Now that connection, a discarded seed creating new life, it seems so simple, right? But that one little idea held the power to change literally everything about what it meant to be human. And that aha moment? Well, it wasn't just one person's experience. It was a realization that slowly rippled across early human groups all over the world. This accidental discovery, it didn't just lead to a new snack. It sparked a full-blown revolution and kicked off an entirely new era for humanity. This all went down during a period scientists call the Neolithic Era, or, the New Stone Age, which got started around 10,000 years ago. This is the moment in history, the turning point, when humans went from just finding their food to, for the very first time, actually producing it. I mean, just stop and think about the sheer scale of this change. Before, life was nomadic, a constant search, following herds, your survival depending entirely on what you could find that day. Suddenly, the new way is all about control. It's about planting crops, raising animals, and building permanent homes. This wasn't just some lifestyle tweak, it was a fundamental rewiring of our entire human operating system. Yeah, historians have a name for this massive shift, the Neolithic Revolution. But here's the thing, it wasn't a single event. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow-burning process, built on one incredibly powerful new concept that humans were just starting to get the hang of. And that big idea was domestication. This is the engine of the entire revolution. Really, domestication is just the process of changing plants or animals to make them more useful to us. So, remember our dropped seed? Domestication is the next level. It's realizing you can choose to plant only the seeds from the sweetest fruits, and over time, you'll get a way better crop. So what were the first big wins? Well, in Southwest Asia, it started with plants, like wild barley and wheat. But the real game changer was when we applied that same idea to animals. Instead of just hunting, people started managing herds of sheep and goats for a steady supply of milk, food, and wool. And then they went even bigger, domesticating cattle, which basically became living engines, pulling the first plows and carrying heavy loads. Humankind had just gotten its first beasts of burden. Now, this ability to control the food supply, it had an immediate and absolutely massive ripple effect. It fundamentally changed where people lived and how they lived. Humanity was about to put down roots. And yeah, I mean that literally. And this is the most direct consequence of all. Once you can grow your own food, you don't need to wander anymore. Just think about that. For the very first time in our history, people could build permanent homes. That nomadic lifestyle that had defined our species for thousands and thousands of years, it started to fade away. But the story doesn't stop there, not even close. This shift from wandering to settling wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a huge domino effect. Staying in one place triggered a whole cascade of changes that would basically upgrade society itself. You can see the chain reaction so clearly. It all starts with farming. That allows for permanent homes. And with a stable food supply and shelter, what happens? Well, populations grow. They get bigger, they get healthier. And finally, those small farming communities start to expand, eventually growing into the world's very first towns. And we're not just talking about some vague idea of a town. We can actually step inside a real one. Çatal Hüyük in modern-day Turkey. Try to imagine it, a town of up to 6,000 people living together almost 8,000 years ago. In an age of tiny, scattered groups of humans, this place was a metropolis. And life there was just fascinatingly complex. Their homes were built from mud-covered wood, but, and here's a wild twist, they didn't have doors. People actually walked across the rooftops and climbed down ladders to get inside. They farmed their crops, sure, but they also had rich religious lives with special shrines decorated with goddesses and bulls' heads. They even figured out how to make cloth from plants and wool. This wasn't just a settlement. This was a society. And all that complexity leads us to the final and maybe most profound change of all. With a much more certain food supply, people had more time. Time to think about things beyond just surviving day to day. And that opened the door for new beliefs and deeper spiritual practices to take hold. So, with survival less of a constant struggle, people could organize in totally new ways. For the first time, huge groups could gather for shared religious ceremonies. And to mark these sacred places, they built megaliths, these massive stone monuments that required incredible cooperation to build. Think about it. You had to quarry the stones, transport them, and then get them standing upright. That's a level of social organization that would be totally impossible for a small nomadic band. The legacy of these structures is just staggering. Just think about Stonehenge in England. Thousands of years later, over 1 million people still visit it every single year. They come to just stand there in awe, trying to connect with the same mystery and meaning our newly settled ancestors built right into those stones. So, what did they actually believe? Well, their spiritual world was deeply tied to their new way of life. Evidence suggests they worshipped gods and goddesses of the elements, the air, water, fire, and earth that now controlled their harvests. They looked up to powerful animals, like those bulls we saw back in Çatal Hüyük, maybe as symbols of strength and fertility. And it's pretty likely they also prayed to their ancestors, looking for guidance in this new, settled world. So it all comes full circle. That simple, accidental discovery of one growing seed gave us agriculture. And agriculture, in turn, gave us permanent homes, towns, and pretty much everything we now call civilization. But it's a trade-off that's really worth thinking about. In gaining this whole new world, what parts of our old wandering soul might we have lost forever?